I'm Ying. Just to preface, my Fulbright was to South Korea, but I myself am not of Korean descent, and I hold U.S. citizenship as one has to in order to apply for the U.S. I believe there was a question of someone who lived in the Philippines for a long time. It doesn't matter how long you've lived in the country for, actually. I know Lisa said that the Fulbright prefers people who don't have too much experience in the country, but someone from my cohort in South Korea had gone back to visit her family every year and she still received the grant. So I think it might vary by country in that case, but you do have to be a US citizen. So yes, I am not of South Korean descent. I hold a US passport, and going into my Fulbright grant was just very hyper aware of my identity as a US citizen, particularly considering the US military presence in South Korea that still goes on there, as well as the tumultuous history that the US has inflicted on the country. Um, to back up a bit though, this is some of my work at RISD. I wanted to share some of the pieces in my portfolio and prepping for going to South Korea. So I, as Lisa mentioned, applied twice. The first year was the summer before my senior year, so submitted senior year fall. And these were pieces from junior year that I had done that were referencing hanbok, traditional Korean clothing that I did over an independent study winter session with Jonghwa Park. If anyone knows her, she's an incredible professor teaching machine knitting and apparel and textiles. But she really helped guide me through traditional Korean costume. And initially, the winter session was supposed to be focusing on all of East Asia, as my brown major was in East Asian studies. But I'm sort of as most recently students get time crunched, I didn't get to the other two countries, and so I ended up focusing solely on South Korea, and that's where this interest really sparked. Um, and so I applied my senior year, passed the first round, as did wonderfully 10 of the current applicants. And then I was rejected in April, and I cried for like a whole week and didn't get out of bed. But then the second time around, Lisa was really great and held my hand and picked me back up, encouraged me to apply again. And I felt as though my next round application was much stronger because of the senior year work I was able to include for my thesis. That was about the relationship between diaspora East Asian daughters specifically and their mothers, and this whole idea that we dream in a different language than our mothers do, and the relationship that stems from that. So those were some of the pieces I included. I chose South Korea because, as I had mentioned, junior winter session, that's when I really delve into hanbok, traditional Korean clothing, but also because compared to the Japanese kimono and also Chinese hanfu, uh, South Korean hanbok was relatively unknown and uncarried by US museums at that time. I think it's gaining more recognition now as the Hallyu or K-wave expands Korean culture across the US and the world, which is its own other sort of research topic to explore. My affiliates were Ewha Women's University and the Hanbok Advancement Center. I found these affiliates because for Ewha Women's University, I was in the RISD library and I was looking for a book on hanbok, and then a book that was like jutting out hit me, and I like picked it up and flipped to the back page, and it had the author's email addresses on the end, and one of the authors was a professor at Ewha Women's University, so I just shot her. Well, I shot all the authors an email, and she was the only one who responded, and so that's how I found Professor Hong from Ewha Women's University. I sat in with some of her graduate students on hanbok history classes as well as traditional sewing classes. And then my second affiliate, Hanbok Advancement Center, I found while I was living in New York City, interning that summer. I just Googled hanbok events New York City and stumbled upon a FIT professor who ended up having a contact at the Hanbok Advancement Center. So as Lisa said, it's really good to start early because a lot of the times your first contact point won't be your actual affiliate, but they might get you to who your eventual affiliate will be. In terms of some of the research I did, oh, I didn't say my research topic. My research topic was exploring how hanbok was being preserved, stored, and innovated in South Korea. I was interested in, especially considering the modernization, some use the term westernization of South Korea in recent years due to US influence, how they were preserving their traditional culture, and if young designers our age were turning traditional culture into something more forward. And so part of the research was going to museums such as the National Folk Museum and National Palace Museum to look at actual artifacts, read those plaques, understand the symbolisms and color dyeing of traditional Korean clothing. And then the second part was speaking to actual designers who were innovating Korean clothing. And at first, I remember feeling really conflicted about these new designs because I was like, oh, are you just adding like a Western armhole? Are you just create like using a zipper closure? Like in a way, are you actually just adding more Western elements? But this designer, Hwang Yi-sol, who's considered one of the pioneers of contemporary hanbok, said something that really stuck out to me, which to her, it wasn't about westernizing but more desirable for people today to wear. And she tries to think, you know, what if hanbok was simpler so more people would wear it on the train or on the bus or just in daily life? Like if we could make hanbok something more applicable to our current times, we can't assume that hanbok wouldn't have evolved if it weren't for the infiltration of Western clothing. We need to imagine the potential of what it could have become. Conversely, though, I also spoke with the cultural master of traditional Korean sewing, Kim Son, and cultural master Koo Hae-ja was really adamant about keeping hanbok as is. She believed that the traditional sort of straight armhole, the traditional wing-like shape of the jackets held such an important spirit to Korean traditional culture that altering it in any way was sacrificing the traditional spirit of the country. In terms of some of the classes and workshops that I took, I learned traditional Korean sewing at UL Women's University, as I mentioned. I reached out to, through the directory that Lisa had shared with everyone, I reached out to former Korean American artists who had received the grant for Hanji, traditional Korean paper, and she introduced me to this incredible Pojagi professor who taught me traditional Korean quilting. I learned traditional Korean knotting, to create these norige, which are like pendants that were often worn as decorative accents to hanbok. And then I also learned traditional Korean dyeing. So this is safflower dye, and you can see the flower itself is quite orange. So it's a very intensive process where you soak the flowers and have to rinse out the yellow from the orange in order to produce a really deep red color. These were just some of the sketchbook notes that I took from museum visits, as well as later sketchbook collages as I was trying to work out my final collection. I ended up not making a final collection. In my proposal, I was like, I'm gonna make a collection of 8 pieces and I'm gonna have an exhibition. And none of that happened, not because of COVID, but actually because, as I said, going in, I was hyper with my identity. And even within the first 2 months, I was like, wow, there's so much here to learn. Like 10 months isn't enough alone just to do all the research. How can I research as much as possible and just make sure I'm being as respectful and as understanding as possible before I jump into creating this like flamboyant collection. I'm also not that great of an artist, so thank God I spent more time doing research than actual making stuff. Anyways, so here in the kitchen, I'm dyeing, use some of the traditional dyeing skills I used to dye chrysanthemum flower, gukwa, which translates to national flower in Korea, to turn this yellow color. And the final garment I made was in collaboration with 2 Korean diaspora friends who became really, really close partners to me during my time there. And so we chose the color yellow to symbolize resilience from the Sewol Ferry incident to the Hong Kong umbrella movement. We thought yellow was the most gentle as well as the most powerful color. And so the piece itself takes elements of hanbok, from the straight armhole to using tie closures only, to the overlapping hem. And then the pants are actually based off, oh, can you see that? I can't go back, but in the small corner, you can see the traditional Korean women's underdrawers that were used to model the pants patterns. Oh, and it could be worn in multiple ways. Here you see the pants being worn at the waist with the jacket over it. And then here the pants are worn sort of more like a jumper over the jacket. And the whole concept here was in dialogue with these 2 Korean diaspora friends about how identity is something that, even though it differs by person, is a uniform that you're constantly having to wear. And so one of the key points was this little hidden pocket at the nape of the neck where I wanted the wearer to hold something precious to them. So here my friend Grace inserted a little photo of her and some of her close friends from the States. And another big takeaway I had from observing hanbok was the amount of movement, that the volume of the garments allowed for. And so we took a bunch of photos of Yeowon doing taekwondo kicks, and really appreciated the way that showcased the movement that might not have come out had the patterns been just static. And oh, these are just general photos, but as Ashton had mentioned, the Fulbright isn't just about, or I found that my Fulbright wasn't just about me making this art project. It was about me understanding another culture, diving into a different country and trying to make new friends there. And I found myself at times when I was sewing in studio and thinking like, I gotta make 8 garments. I'm like, why am I doing this? I could be sewing in like New York City. I could be sewing in my home in Michigan, but only here can I visit like the Haeundae Temple in Busan. Only here can I visit this like indie bookstore in Seoul, which might sound selfish, but really so much of the exploration and trying to understand the spirit of the country I was in, I think gave me the resources I have now as an artist back in the States to continue my practice going forward, even if I didn't make as many things while I was in Korea.